Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Center for Economic Inclusion and our first fall Powering Inclusion session for fall 2022. We are thrilled to have you with us, joining us this afternoon for a wonderful conversation about our supply chain and our opportunities to advance inclusive economic growth through equitable procurement and purchasing. We're thrilled to be back with you after a break for the summer from our series and hope that you are ready for a wonderful time because we have got a powerful conversation and some exciting. Well, it doesn't help if I'm muted. Good afternoon, everyone. We're thrilled to be with you. I'm Tawana Black, the founder and CEO of the Center for Economic Inclusion, and we're thrilled to be with you this afternoon for a return to our Powering Inclusion series, today discussing the opportunities that we have to build inclusive economic growth through equitable procurement and purchasing. And we're excited to be able to be back with you for this series and to bring you powerful research on the state of equitable and inclusive supply chains in our marketplace and the solutions that we have to drive here in the Twin Cities and beyond across Minnesota and across the country, and to share some updates with you on Project Vanguard. So welcome in. We encourage you to not only join us for today's forum, but to also share the YouTube link with your friends and family, your coworkers and peers, so others can join us live for this conversation as well on the Center for Economic Inclusion's YouTube page. We also want to encourage you, as we do every time that we gather for these virtual series, to take advantage of the many vendors in our community who are available for you to take advantage of for lunch. We know that if we don't buy local, we will be saying goodbye to our many wonderful local restaurants in our Black, Asian, Indigenous, and Latino communities. So you have a list of those vendors that are available on our website. So if you haven't already visited them and placed an order for your team, then we encourage you to be sure that you do that and invest in our local community so they can continue to grow and prosper on today. Thanks so much for continuing to do that and investing in the local economy here. I want to say a big thank you to our Powering Inclusion and Reckoning to Rise sponsors. These foundations and businesses continue to invest in our work here at the Center for Economic Inclusion, and we're especially grateful to them. So a big thank you to each one of these organizations for their belief in our work here at the Center for Economic Inclusion to build an economy that truly works for everyone. I also want to say a big thank you to JP Morgan Chase and to the GHR Foundation, who are investing in our work with Project Vanguard and ensuring that we're able to invest directly in Black women, Latino women, and Indigenous people and their businesses, and continue to ensure that our economy grows because of these businesses who are investing in building jobs that pay family-sustaining wages. We could not do this work without their significant investments in Project Vanguard and the Vanguard Fund, and we want to say a big thank you to each one of them. Now, let's take a moment to do some early polling. We know that the room is still filling up some. We're going to have a lot more folks coming into the room, but we want to do some early polling. So you'll see a poll coming up on your screens right now, those of you who are with us with Zoom. And so we want to invite you to respond to this. This helps us know a little bit about who is with us at this early stage. And so if you could take some time and give us some feedback, it helps us understand who's participating here with us on today. Give us a little bit of insight about your racial identity, your age, gender identity, and the number of events that you've attended with us here at the Center for Economic Inclusion, and how you're using the knowledge, the relationships, the content that you're receiving each time that you engage with us. We'd love to get that feedback from you. It helps us be sure that we are delivering for you as we work to be sure that we are engaging folks from different sectors, different racial and gender and age backgrounds and professional backgrounds and experiences, and be sure that we're not only having the talk, but we're actually delivering on the information that we get from that talk each time that we gather here today. So we appreciate you giving us that insight as you see that poll come up on your screen now. Appreciate you each doing that. We've got about 100, just over 100 folks who are in the room right now. We expect that we may have another 100 or so who gather with us over the next hour or so. So we appreciate you giving us that early insight to help us get started here this afternoon. All right, we'll give it maybe another couple seconds and then we'll close our poll out. Excellent. Thank you very much. Awesome. So it looks like we've got a strong mix here. We've got a large African-American population, about 35% of us in the room. We've got a strong Asian population too, about 15%, about 5% Latino population in the room with us, 2% Indigenous population in the room with us, and 44% white population, 2% biracial population. Our age mix, we don't have any 18 to 20 year olds in the room with us. We'll have to reach down in our younger group, but we do have 20% of us are 21 to 29. We've got 30% who are 40 to 49, about 25% in that 50 to 59, and then a good dispersal throughout our other age categories as well. We have a large female population here today. We've got 77% of us in the female category and 23% in the male category on today. And we have, a wide number of first timers here with us today. That's excellent to see. Welcome to your first engagement with the Center for Economic Inclusion. 55% of folks are at their first event, and a big group who also have been with us for more than 6 events. Welcome back. We'd love to see that 11% of you. And then about 20% have been with us at 1 to 3 and 15% or so at 4 to 6 events. And then in terms of the ways that you're using what you gain with us, we love to see this diversity as well. Over 41% of you are using those relationships that you gain. You're chatting in the chats, or you've been at your first face-to-face events. Maybe you were with us in June and you're continuing to use those relationships to drive more impact inside your organizations across sectors. 12% have used what you've gained to drive new policies, practices, or strategies that are anti-racist in workforce. We love that. 14%, we really love that given today's topic, have taken on a new strategy in the supplier diversity realm or a new practice or policy. 9% have taken on new policies in the philanthropy space or arena. And 18%, this is also excellent, have taken on a new anti-racist economic development, workforce development policy, practice, or strategy. Excellent responses on today. Great work, you all. We love to hear it. We love to see it, and we love to be a part of it. So keep calling on us. Keep letting us know how we can support you as you take on these actions and phenomenal work inside your organizations and throughout our communities and economy. Let's keep moving now. We want to encourage you, as you are a part of this conversation on today, to don't just keep it inside, but share it widely as well. You can reach us on many social handles across Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn, and we want you to do that. You can also reach our speakers and promote the things that you hear on today. Tap in with each one of them using these different social handles. So take note of these with the hashtag Powering Inclusion. Again, Powering Inclusion. You can use any of these hashtags or social handles that you see here across those platforms. And we want you to elevate the voices that you hear on today and their thought leadership as you tag different things that you might hear on today so that folks can engage in the conversation and we let these lessons learned go out further as well. Excuse me. Now, let's talk about what we are going to share on today. We want to ground you, for those of you who are first timers, in who we are here at the Center for Economic Inclusion. Our mission is about closing racial wealth gaps and building regional economies that truly do work for everyone. These two things go inextricably together, and we come together inside our communities here in Minnesota and beyond to help public and private sector employers gain the knowledge, the skills, and tools in order to dismantle systemic racism and build workplaces that work for everyone and contribute to the economy in ways that are sustainable and prosperous, ultimately for everyone, by closing racial employment, income, and wealth gaps. Our organization is committed to doing the work that it takes to be able to help people take the steps and actions that are needed every single day to ensure that by 2024, 1,000 people are taking the steps that are needed every day in order to ensure that over 1 million people are prospering and are experiencing an economy that is truly just and equitable and moving forward in ways that are prosperous for each one of them. Our team could go to the next slide, please. I'd appreciate it. Our market and the places that we show up inside our communities is one that is working with mid-sized local governments and mid-sized privately held companies. And our values are really about demonstrating love, inside our own organization and with communities, but also about shared accountability, shared leadership, shared power, and being humbly confident learners. And we invite you to experience and to demonstrate those values as you work together here in today's forum, but also anytime that you're partnering with us and partnering together in communities. Next slide, please. We want you to know who our team is, even as we're here in this virtual environment on today. Hopefully, you've gotten to know many of our colleagues and partners here at the Center for Economic Inclusion along your journey. If you've engaged with us in an event, maybe our team is out consulting with you. You've worked with our researchers, our policy leaders. But these are the members of the team at the Center for Economic Inclusion, and our team is growing every single day. And so we invite you to get to know our team. They're in the chat, so you can reach out to any one of them who might be of help to you. You can also go to our website in order to get to know who does what at the Center for Economic Inclusion and might be a great contact for you. We also want to announce to you and share with you that we have appointed a new director of Project Vanguard, the grounding of today's focus, who is Saroon Aram, who was a part of our organization before, is a part of our organization, and has been working in our consulting division, and now will begin to move into a role with Project Vanguard, bringing the strength and knowledge that she's gained over a number of years working in both the private, public, and philanthropic arenas in order to help us fuel our work with Black and Latina and Indigenous women business owners and with corporations and government agencies who are committed to building a supply chain that is diverse, is inclusive, is equitable, and is helping to fuel regional economic growth in ways that are meaningful to this supply chain. So we're thrilled to have Saroon moving into this role and thrilled for each one of you to begin working with her in this capacity. And you'll learn more about that in just a little bit. Next slide, please. You see here the description of Project Vanguard. If we could go back here for just a moment. You see the description here of Project Vanguard and the opportunity to learn more about this. We announced Project Vanguard several months ago as JPMorgan Chase announced the center's award of, winning the Advancing Cities Challenge. Project Vanguard is an accelerator that gives us the opportunity to invest deeply here in Minnesota in building the capacity of not only business owners who are invested in growing in our communities, but specifically to invest in Black and Latino women business owners who have the ability to change our face of our ecosystem as business owners who are growing their ability to employ people in jobs that pay family sustaining wages. Those business owners who are in growth sectors, those business owners who can be doing contracts specifically with the private sector and the public sector. We recognize as we continue to build out this program, an accelerator, that we had a need for research that would help us understand exactly what corporations are purchasing, what our government sector is purchasing, what the barriers are to purchasing directly from business owners of color, and what those business owners are experiencing when they're attempting to do business with the private sector and where we needed to intervene. We wanted to understand what our CDFIs and our community lenders are experiencing as they're working to diversify these corporate and government supply chains and know directly how to intervene in the ecosystem as we work to be a value add into this arena. We've worked collaboratively throughout not only the Twin Cities, but Minnesota in building this accelerator and in bringing research to bear that would help both the supply and demand side of our economy. And we're excited to share, this research with you that you'll be able to take advantage of on our website this morning and over the coming weeks. And now I'm going to have a conversation with one of the authors of this report, to be able to share this with you and go a little bit more in depth about what we see in our ecosystem here in Minnesota. And then we'll follow that with a conversation of several regional leaders who work in this space every single day and can talk to us about how they see this research landing in our marketplace and helping both supply chain leaders and business owners start to change the way that we move here in Minnesota to drive an inclusive and equitable supply chain. At this time, I'd love to be able to introduce to you Judith Williams Dangerfield, an experienced leader who has been the founder and owner of Metro Source, where she consults with numerous local, state, and national organizations and governmental entities on equity and inclusion in contracting, DBE program design, implementation and compliance, workforce development, small business development, and strategies for closing the racial wealth gap. She served for 2 years as the Director of Supplier Diversity for the City of New Orleans and 3 years as a federal monitor for the consent decree between the U.S. Department of Justice, the New Orleans Police Department, and the City of New Orleans. We're so grateful that she and her team led this study on advancing inclusive economic regional growth through the equitable procurement and purchasing. The study has allowed us to focus on opportunities to improve regional public and private sector purchasing and supplier diversity areas, the market opportunity for building diverse, local, resilient supply chains, and the experiences that our community of Black and Latino women-owned businesses are navigating in the ecosystem. Welcome, Judith, and thanks so much for being here with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to a robust conversation.
Absolutely. First of all, I have to say to the audience, I gave the formal introduction, but you are someone that I've been blessed to work with and learn from for a number of years, since the work in the north side of Minneapolis focused on African-American men's employment and learning from and with you and your colleagues in New Orleans. So it was so wonderful to be able to engage with you again. I don't just know the bio side of things. I know your real work on the ground in New Orleans, and it's been great for us to learn from and with you here as we work to expand this work. Can you talk to us about what you saw, not only in the research, but as you've led research and consulted on the vendor diversity efforts and the business development efforts that we're doing here? Can you tell us what you found in the research and how that contrasted with your experience as you interacted? What was unique here in Minneapolis and St. Paul in the metro area compared to what you've seen in other marketplaces?
So when we look at the ecosystem, one of the things we tend to find in places that are doing this work is a concentration of services and efforts for new businesses, for startup or emerging businesses, or businesses in that very early stage of development. We tend to see an overlap in services, a lot of times fueled by the fact that there's competition for who's funding this type of work. We tend also to see, which is something that's different, a heavy reliance on public sector opportunity. What we see in your region is the expansive opportunities in private sector connections, private sector supply chains for small businesses, for businesses owned by people of color, and a real commitment across organizations in the ecosystem to advance that work. Regional partnerships is something we see in your region that we don't see in other places. The fact that this is not just about a single city or a city place, the connectivity to a greater region, the funding, the capital stack offered to businesses is slightly different. You guys have more opportunities around venture capital, other sources of capital than just debt. So tremendous opportunity we see in the ecosystem, particularly because your private sector is huge. And there's so much opportunity across the companies that are doing business there, more than we see in a lot of other places.
That's helpful to hear. And I think it's particularly helpful because I think in any area, you tend to focus more on the things you don't have and what's not working. Right. So to hear you mention, well, you have opportunity. You have opportunity because you have a lot of corporations. You have opportunity because you have more funding sources than you have in other places. I have to go here then, because you see this opportunity, what is getting in our way as a result of that, of having the opportunity? Then what did you see that's our challenge?
So like most places, I'm going to phrase this very diplomatically, is the being able to address the fact that race is not risk, that we could build a supply chain of businesses owned by people of color, and doing business with these firms does not create more risk than any other firm that you would do business with. We have to, everywhere we go, we have to acknowledge that bias is gonna be in the decision-making process. The opportunity for us then is, how do we build the supply chain in a way that absolutely mitigates the risk? How do we really level the playing field? And I understand a lot of times we're dealing with smaller businesses, we're dealing with businesses that are less resourced. So part of our challenge is to build our ecosystem that mitigates that risk, and particularly that mitigates that risk for the private companies that are looking to do business with businesses owned by people of color and don't always know how. And then the other thing that tends to stand in our way is the notion that we the notion that we can't require of our private sector firms to really lean in and to really share our commitment, and that we can't help them to do it. In the same way that we would build a policy for government, we can help our private corporations to build those policies and change that culture and really lean in and not just cursory check the box, but to really engage with us as we do this work. And then I think the other thing that tends to get in our way, and I'll go back to the ecosystem. An ecosystem is a system. It's not a group of people in the same place that care about the same thing. The people in that ecosystem have to be able to work with each other and share. There has to be handoffs from one part of the ecosystem to the other, but the ecosystem should represent the entirety, not just a small space. So one of the things that gets in our way is that the ecosystem is not functioning as a system. And we need to make it a system so that every entity is relying specifically on every other entity. And not that we just all care about the small businesses, but that we all care about each other and that we are committed equal partners in this work.
I might start there and go a little bit deeper. That notion of all means not just the CDFIs, not just the lenders, not just the corporations at their table, not just philanthropy at their table, but that would suggest everybody from all the tables have to be at one table. And I want to underscore, you noted that care about each other. The center has the value, as I noted earlier, of love. And we don't shy away from putting that out there because we have to say it, we have to mean it, we have to talk about what does it mean in demonstration to actually talk about it, right? That it's not scary to say that or weird to say that because it gets in the way. I think if we're not comfortable saying that the absence of that is part of what has gotten us to this point, and then where does that lie in contrast to what we've always talked about, right? That saying that it's too risky is part of the problem. That business is business and dollars are dollars. They don't really have colors attached to them except for green. But that we've made it say that right in the system. Can you talk a little bit more about what you think that looks like?
Yeah, so part of the ecosystem is the notion that if one part of the system fails, that organism is crippled. If just one piece fails, the organism is crippled. So that means we're all responsible for holding each other up. Number one, we all have to do our part, but we all have to hold every piece up. And when we look at the ecosystem, so I'm going to use an analogy I just heard at a panel discussion with historically Black colleges and universities. If you look at football as an ecosystem, you have number 25 on the field trying to do his job, but you have an owner who's rooting for him, and you have people in the stadiums that are rooting for him, and you have somebody on the corner who couldn't afford a ticket who's also rooting for him. If each one of those don't care about how the other is experiencing the game, you have a group, but you don't have a community. So it's not just the CDFIs and not just the TA providers, but the leaders in government, the leaders in the private sector that are making the decision. Everybody has to care about how the ecosystem operates. And everybody has to be able to contribute in a safe space, in a loving space, in a caring space, not just caring for the small businesses, but caring for each other.
Mm-hmm. You have a group, but you don't have a community. Yes. Do we have a community here in MSP? It's a good question for us. I want to pose that to the audience to think about that. Do we have a community? If you're here from another city or another community, another state, another region, do we really have a community that is going to produce a ecosystem of business owners who are thriving and prospering, who are creating jobs that pay family sustaining wages? Or do we have a group that's going to produce some percentages on a report that tells us what spend is, but isn't going to change the number, right? Where I was with a corporation last week that said, I know we've been working hard for 20 years, but the stats haven't changed. That would suggest, right, we don't have a community, but we got groups. Yeah, I love that. I love that notion. Can you talk more about that second point, maybe the space of, we've had policies in the government sector. We have been afraid to say that we could have policies as well, that we could help corporations create policies. That's the work that we do, right? We come inside, we help corporations create those policies. And we talked with a client just yesterday, and our team spent some time on this, that notion that often corporations, if we think about construction corporations do work with governmental entities. Often, though, the standard that might be established or set if a corporation is doing work to build a stadium that has public dollars, that same standard might not translate over to the next project that does not have city or state dollars or federal dollars attached to it. Can you talk to us about how, if we're a community, right, how community can work to say the standard should be the standard, should be the standard? And maybe not only in a space of construction, but how do we also take that if it's consumer packaged goods, if it is, the next arena? And we see this, we've got some big retail giants in our marketplace who are trying to think about that same notion as it relates to, you can be really good sometimes with what goes on the shelf, but you can struggle with applying that same notion to all the operations that have to go behind getting products on the shelf.
Right. So it comes down to the notion that racial equity has to be a part of the culture and the values of the corporations that are operating in our spaces. And holding the corporations accountable to that is something that the community can do. It is also something that the employees should do, and also something that the corporation should do to make sure the employees are being accountable. I can tell you on the government side, if I get government money, I have a duty, I have an affirmative duty to make sure, number one, there is no discrimination, and number two, to heal any discrimination, any harm from the past. Government has that as an affirmative duty. How do we build that affirmative duty into the corporations? And we tend to think when we talk about private sector, oh, it's the market and we can't touch it because the market has to do what it do. But we forget that the market is in service to the people as well. And so we can't say we're hands off with the corporations. We're going to build all of our policies. We're going to do all of our advocacy around the public sector, when most of the spending, for every $1 we're spending in government, the private sector is spending 50. So if we're going to build those policies and practices, and if we're really going to advance that affirmative duty for equal protection, for economic inclusion, to redress the harm, to avoid the discrimination, it has to be everywhere in our system, not just on the public sector side.
Absolutely. Absolutely agree with that. Can you talk to us as we think about this notion of community and all the various different partners? And we've got lots of partners in our system, our ecosystem, and in the audience, I know. And many are thinking about what it means to support business owners, small business owners, which is a large definition. Can you talk to us about what you heard as you talked to the business owners, Black, Latino, Indigenous business owners, about their experience navigating this ecosystem and how we can collectively in this community support business owners and get more to scale?
So there were a lot of things going on there, but the one thing I heard that really resonated was having somebody I could talk to who could tell me how to navigate the system. Having somebody I can apply for a project with government, but having somebody to walk me through how that's done. And then on the government side, they would say, well, some of the folks don't really know that these are things that they could do. And the same on the private sector side. Who do I talk to that can absolutely give me the information? And one of the first things folks ask for, but who can navigate us through the process to make sure we're not just spinning our wheels? The notion of capital came up. And when we think about capital, so when I look in your ecosystem, there is a lot of loan products, but we have to remember that a loan is debt. And that is not always the capital that these businesses need to be able to thrive and prosper. We don't always have that line of credit or that patient capital that businesses need. And then when we look at the payment cycle on public sector and private sector, it takes so long to get paid. And the time it takes to get your receivables, you may be out of business. So part of what we can ask the ecosystem to do is to make the capital match the needs of the businesses and the opportunities of that business to grow, to give people the navigators and the influence, give people the capital that they need, and then to make sure we're going across the spectrum of business growth. It is nice to be a small business. I have been a small business for 25 years, not because I don't want to be a big business, but because small businesses, and particularly businesses owned by people of color, we tend to always be small businesses. The goal is always for us to grow into a big business. If I'm doing $1 million a year, I should be doing 10. If I'm doing 10, I should be doing 50. So how do we make sure that ecosystem covers the entire life cycle of businesses? So I don't just get to my $1 million goal, and then I'm there forever. So how do we do that as well? Make sure that we are supporting business across the business life cycle and understand that being a small business, unless you want a lifestyle business, being a small business is not about being a small business. It's about one day being a big business, recognizing that and supporting that as we support these businesses.
Absolutely. That notion around patient capital, as we look at the marketplace, part of our incentive for getting into this work was seeing that, one, we had a large number of large corporations who made a big number of pledges to invest in, to spend with businesses. We looked at the data, we thought, wait a minute, there aren't a number of businesses who are over $1 and $2 million in annual revenues who are going to be able to compete for those contracts. And so a lot of that money is going to leave our marketplace. It's not going to create jobs in our marketplace. And in 2025, the celebration is going to happen everywhere except where this whole impetus started here, right? Following George Floyd's murder. And that's shameful. That's not the answer here. And yet getting corporations to say, it doesn't all have to start with, to your point, debt, but it also may not start with an immediate big set of contracts. Have you seen marketplaces where corporations, government entities are seeing how they can either break down some of those large contracts and or invest differently, right? Start to create policies that allow them to put patient capital into companies that they want to see grow and scale so they can compete for those larger contracts that would help them become bigger businesses, move out of that under 100,000 in annual revenues, move out of that under $1 million in annual revenues, up to the point that they can compete for those larger contracts. I think Judith may be frozen on us just a little bit. So we'll take a note. I'll see if my team is seeing something different than me for just a moment. And then we may pivot if we haven't got her to be able to engage our panelists. Apologize for this audience. So we may pivot and then bring Judith back in just a moment. Hopefully you are getting a moment to be able to gather the report online. I believe our team has put a link to the report for you so that you can download that from our website. And so I will pivot now and then have an opportunity to introduce our panelists to you for some discussion, and then we'll bring Judith back in to the conversation. Oh, Judith's right back with us. Awesome. Awesome. Welcome back, Judith, to the conversation. So I'll ask another question, give you a moment to be able to gather back. So my question is, have you seen places where, as we think about the ecosystem, I think I may go to bringing in our panelists just to be on the safe side team. So I'll introduce to you all our panelists now, which are on the screen for you right now. So these are three folks who are no stranger to those of you who work in supplier diversity or work in building our ecosystem of community economic development. Each one of them have led and worked in transforming our economy and are deeply committed to this topic and to partnering with us. Kristen Guild is the Director of Business Bridge at Greater MSP, a platform at Greater MSP, the partnership that is leveraging the buying power of Minneapolis-St. Paul's large corporations to drive economic growth in our region. Welcome, Kristen. Shannon Lindman is the founder of Intent Energy LLC, and Shannon has been driving innovation and spearheading organizational change and economic expansion and new business development initiatives for over 20 years, both here in Minnesota and across the country. Welcome, Shannon. And Miguel Ramos is the Senior Director of Diversity and Inclusion Strategy at the Minnesota Twins, where he has also been leading similar work and expanding and investing in businesses owned by people of color and a wealth of multicultural marketing experience to develop more culturally diverse programming, integration, and stronger relationships with diverse communities. After joining the Twins as a native of Puerto Rico, and having worked with Nestle before leading his own consulting firm with clients in the professional sports industries, corporations, and nonprofit organizations. Welcome to the three of you, and thank you so much for joining us for today's conversations. I'm thrilled to have each one of you both here and as partners with us in Project Vanguard. I'll start with both Shannon and Miguel with a question. We know that the history of struggle and barriers facing our communities, but particularly facing Black, Latino, and Indigenous business owners is significant. Can you both talk to us about how you've seen the landscape shift and change over the last 2 years as these commitments from corporations to increase the diversity of their supply chains have increased? And then what struggles have you seen with large suppliers as those supply chain experiences have taken place, particularly as a result of COVID-19?
Yeah. Do you want to go first?
Okay, I go first. Sure. First, thank you for the opportunity to be here and talk about how together we can make a difference in life of many community members, small business, specifically minority business. Like someone said, this need to be doing together, and we need everyone in this role. Being a minority business too, my daughter was a minority, or is a minority business, and started the whole process and work with so many brothers and sisters from the community and with minority business. So you can see that the challenge always are there. And regardless about the commitment that happened, regardless about the message about unfortunately, the murder of George Floyd, that everyone start to talk about we should be doing A, B, or C, regarding anything, challenge is still there for our business. If you take in consideration that many of our business maybe not had the equal opportunity to build equity, and they always are behind, and they need to work sometimes 3 times to build the right connection, to talk with corporations. When I have my own consulting work, I say, hey, I am Miguel Ramos from American Multivision. And people say, American Multi what? First, my English is not in my second language. Second, sometimes people don't try to understand. And then people say, who is this guy? And regardless what you do in the community, regardless that when you say something, they know who you are, so you don't know. Now, after 14 years that I working with a great organization, with a great brand, the Minnesota Twins, when you say, I am Miguel Ramos from the Twins, people say, yeah, the Twins. So they're more willing to listen what you can bring to the table. Our minority small business not have that luxury. They're struggling survivor, working hard with financial resources, the limited financial resources that they're working somehow, and I know with the George Floyd and the pandemic they have some grants that was available for some minority business owners, but not enough so that they can continue moving on, because they had the same challenge that other big business have with the pandemic. So they need to change the way they do business. That it's no more longer people go to the store. You need to now do more technical support. You need to create more online selling products, service, or whatever. So they need to change the technology. Well, how you're going to do that if you're struggling with resources to do the basic thing that you do before, and I think that's always is like we are behind, but it's at the same time we have the opportunity, with working together with what we're doing now. Is a great opportunity because we never can lose hope. We understand the challenge and we know also the opportunities. So, in case of the Twins, later I'm going to tell you what I feel will be important that work for us, and very important also. We need to understand that inflation that affects not only one sector. The inflation affects everyone. And again, if we back again in terms of equity resources or whatever, so our small business always have been behind.
Jana?
Yes, and the first thing I want to say is the history is heavy and real and very persistent. The opportunities, as Miguel was talking about, is for the ability for us to be able to present ourselves as who we are in our full power and strength and be seen as who we are without trying to fit into some definition of success. I think the things that have excited me over the past couple of years are the fact that the old adage, don't plan with me, but plan for me. I think there's been far more strategic intention on identifying how institutions, organizations, individuals can respond to the need by really engaging community, not as an afterthought or a box check, but sitting at the table and really informing and infusing best practices and reality checks and defining what is needed in order for businesses of color to succeed. The other thing that has been really encouraging is the funding that organizations led by people of color have received, putting decision makers in the seats to be able to fuel and finance solutions that really mean something to those they are seeking to serve. And what I would say is, in terms of working to deploy solutions that community truly leads, has been a change as well. We have a long way to go. 20 years is a long time. Supplier diversity actually started in the 70s. It has been successful in creating some billion-dollar businesses owned by people of color, but we have far too many businesses that are not supply chain companies. And we need something radical that is far different than what we've been doing. And hopefully some of those shifts over the past 2 years are getting us closer. And with that, the last major change is that we as a region, I think, are finally starting to seriously talk about supplier diversity. And that's huge.
I appreciate both of those responses. I think both of you hit on a couple of notions that I think underscore a bit of what Judith shared in terms of that sense of the community, right? That we have to have some common vision. You noted that, Shannon, the planning for versus planning with. What is the vision that already exists within community, and how can resources and assets come to fuel that vision, that innate ability that may not always be a conscious element if a plan is created outside of community or resources are out here, but how can those things come together? Can you all speak about what you see occurring in our community right now, and what are those possibilities for really becoming one, for it having both supply and demand and resources coming together to fuel and invest in the assets that are in communities, both different racial and ethnic communities, geographic communities. Shannon, you've done quite a bit of work in different geographies as well. What's that possibility, and what does it take to invest in the sparks that you mentioned, Shannon, that we're seeing right now, to be sure those sparks really become big fires that can't get hampered back down?
Well, I don't want to steal Kristen's thunder, but I think the business bridge focusing on supply chain is huge, and I'll let her speak to that. I really think the fact that we are in a position to look at business in the full continuum is exciting. We've spent a lot of time on businesses that are smaller, more proprietorship. We have a serious economic crisis with baby boomers wanting an exit for their companies and not necessarily having a plan. The opportunity for people to look at buying companies and being a part of that solution. So I'm really excited about a broader definition of what it means to be in color and in business, and to start having different types of funding discussions. So the Vanguard Fund, I think it's going to be huge, but we need to look at all the philanthropic efforts, as well as the VC and private equity arenas, and start supporting businesses that are larger and can grow and meet the supply chain needs. And I do believe that we are headed in that direction. And I'm not sure if that's what you were heading for.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. There's Kristen.
Yeah, I'll hop in. Thanks. And thanks for the note, Shannon, about Business Bridge. So just a little bit of background, and I agree. I think it's a significant move that Business Bridge is focusing in on supplier diversity now. So some background, Business Bridge is a coalition of procurement executives that have been focused on increasing their local spending. They've been working together on that goal for about a decade now. And they've had a really great track record with that work of increasing local spend. So in the past decade, they've increased their local spending $3 billion annually. So that means that there's $3 billion every year that's invested into our local economy here that would not be but for those Business Bridge Coalition efforts. And they've done that by doing two things. They've achieved that outcome by doing two key things. One is peer learning, just sharing strategies for that goal that they apply within each of their companies, and then shared accountability. So tracking aggregated local spending each year. So pretty simple, basic stuff that has achieved that kind of outcome. Now, what I think is huge here is that the Business Bridge Coalition looked around and said, we've done this with a pretty light touch with a local spend goal. Where should we be focusing our efforts moving forward? And they resoundingly came to the conclusion that it needed to be supplier diversity. A number of the companies individually had strong supplier diversity programs, but they were all recognizing that there was a lot more that they could be doing and that they should be doing. And the companies were making these very public pledges as well that Tawana referenced earlier. So with that, they're applying these same approaches, these same two key approaches as they did with the local spend goal that they've been so successful with, that peer learning and that shared accountability. And to that, the group is adding a few new strategies that I think are going to be really critical here. And the new strategies get to that, how are we a community? How are we an ecosystem? And to a real focus on data that I think we'll probably be circling around to in this conversation quite a bit. So one, they're starting to work toward aggregating category demand. So they've been aggregating what their spend is, looking backwards. Now we're working together on combining the forecasts of what these companies in the Business Bridge group expect to buy. So forward looking rather than backward looking, and something that we can communicate to the market about where the opportunity is going to be. The market, our ecosystem, can respond with that good information, that good market information. The group is also working to establish supply side partnerships for the first time for supplier development, and then also outreach with organizations like the Center, like MEDA, our local chambers are some of the other partners in that work. And then we're also adding buyer companies to the Business Bridge Coalition. So expanding the table of folks who are working on this together.
Kristen, as you think about that, I think the $3 billion can't be overstated, really. It's stellar to think about companies who, and I having been at the table working with both Itasca as Business Bridge started, and then as it's moved over to greater MSP, I think there was it's important to note that I think the early expectation was that if we spend locally, it will naturally trickle down and have a supplier diversity impact. And that didn't happen. And so companies have been willing to acknowledge that, hey, what we hoped would happen didn't happen by having the local spend. And I want to just underscore that part for you, if I can here, so that companies who may not be a part of Business Bridge can also just understand that the hope of, if we spend local, hasn't been borne out. It hasn't been borne out in government. It hasn't been borne out in the private sector, that it takes that intentionality. And so Business Bridge getting to this point of saying we have to have an intentional goal here is data-based. It's having that data that says, wait a minute, unless we're explicitly focused here on all of these levers of having not just the goal and the data, but each of these levers you've articulated of having community relationships, intentional strategic partnerships, having the extra background of what are we buying as well, because because that's been, I think, a tension between those organizations who are doing the pipeline building, doing the technical assistance and the lending, and communities have all struggled with for a few years of how do we make sure we know what companies need to purchase? So as entrepreneurs come in and say, hey, I want to purchase one of these businesses that a baby boomer might be selling, I need to know which one really, though, is a great opportunity here. Shannon described that missing information from the large corporate community has been a big opportunity or growth area for us. And so it's a big opportunity and a big commitment that Business Bridge is making here to help shift the market between large corporations here in particularly the Twin Cities, and then this community of entrepreneurs and would-be entrepreneurs to close this gap. But it's not just about closing the gap, it's also about moving our economy forward. When we look at who are creating businesses across the United States, it is Black and brown people. And so that opportunity to be sure that those businesses have an opportunity to fulfill the supply chain needs of companies like Target, who have said, we won't continue to grow without having this growth of businesses owned by people of color, is huge. It's huge.
Absolutely. It can't be magical thinking. It has to be, real intentionality, tangible goals. I don't think I mentioned before that the Business Bridge Group has set an explicit goal for their supplier diversity work, which is to increase their local diverse spend by 500 million over the next 5 years. So that's really significant. I put an emphasis there on local too, because we need to be focusing on the companies in our backyard, and we need to have an explicit goal established for that local diverse spend in order to achieve the outcomes that we want to reach. Otherwise, it becomes too diffuse, and you end up with too large of goals or too abstract of goals or not targeted enough goals. You end up just more checking a box or saying, here's our report, like Judith said earlier. It's that compliance rather than real outcomes.
Absolutely. That is significant. And I want to note what Judith has got in the chat here, that what our data showed from the report is that the region has very little leakage, meaning that when those dollars are spent with companies, the vast majority of those dollars stay in our marketplace. So they're creating jobs in our marketplace. Those dollars are then being spent by workers in our marketplace. And so that turn over and over of those dollars is only strengthening our own economy. So there's very strong interest. This is in everyone in our marketplace's best interest. Supplier diversity is not a charity play. I think often in my history of DEI and racial equity work, it's often received as like, why do I have to give up these dollars to a new vendor or a person of color? Like, it's not a charity play. It is not a zero-sum game. It is a good thing for the entire economy when we get this work right, even if it takes extra effort to be able to begin to shift those systems. I want to ask you a question, Miguel. You've leveraged many partnerships and been well recognized for your great work at the Minnesota Twins and your supplier diversity work, and established some great goals to be able to, that has inspired many other corporations to do the same work. Talk to us about what works, what's your secret, and what do you say to other corporations like those in Business Bridge who want to do more but don't know where to start?
Well, it's not necessarily a secret. It's about commitment, but real commitment. And the commitment is about see how the culture of the company is and how we can change collective that culture that can really help the organization to reach the DEI goal. But it's not about procurement only responsibility. It's about the whole organization responsibility, starting from the top of the organization, ownership, that we are clear about what we want to accomplish, and have accountability. And so I think it's important to see these companies see procurement development from all levels, from some small business opportunities to the big business opportunity. And like the report say, sometimes be willing to do business in a different way. Be willing to divide, some of these contracts. So where some organization that maybe not have the enough resources to do the big contract, but together with others, they can collaborate and do what the company are looking for. And the last thing I think is important for really have a program is about the relationship that you build with community and partnership with community. So we can wait, and that's what we try to do in this organization. We can wait till the people come to us to try to sell something. We need to go outside and build a partnership and network and working with organization with economic development, organization that starting with a small business as a teenage small business incubators, that because you don't know when those incubators is going to be one of the future procurement person or procurement people that you can do business, So we need to build those relationships as a company. That's what we try to concentrate. We create program that we promote those small businesses. We call it a game changer. That what we do is we highlight, the organization should highlight the work that a small business, minority small business do in the community, because also not only they do a business, but also they're part of the community because they do also some volunteer works. But we need to highlight them, provide the platform, media platform, exposition, and all the kind of stuff that maybe they're not going to have if they not are selected as a game changer. So if we all big corporation really, if you want to say, okay, come with the three choice is first, you need to be sure that the commitment is real. That this is not only to check a box. This is not something to feel nice and put something in your honor report. Secondly, be sure that the whole organization understand what we do, and everyone agree about that. And the third thing, be authentic and be proactive in what you say is more about what you do. And you can start it slowly, but you need to start, and be willing to make change. Be willing to break the way that you do business today, because the way that you do business today is no more longer the way for the future. If we want to, our companies want to be productive in the future, we need to change the way because the community is changing.
I could not agree with each one of those three recommendations any more. Oh my goodness, Miguel, that is it. Being real about what we do, being sure everyone understands the why. That there's a saying of Maya Angelou's that when you know better, you do better. But often people understanding the why. I am a person like that. My kids are that way, right? They have to get the why, or they're not going to change what they're doing. And in companies that have distributed procurement, where you've got thousands of people with a purchasing responsibility, being sure they all really understand the big why behind it is so huge. And I also appreciate your notion too. You got to start somewhere, and waiting until we have all the pieces perfect will keep our communities and our economy stuck where they are. That is a huge point for us. Thank you for that. Shannon, I want to come back to something you raised earlier, your commitment and focus on ensuring that as this change happens in our aging populations and businesses come available, we are able to take full advantage of that. You've been building Black businesses all over the country for a number of years and came back to your home state to do that more. Talk to us about why you have such a laser-like focus on this opportunity right now, and what levers you think we need to be pulling here in Minnesota, and particularly St. Paul and Minneapolis, to be sure that we're positioned to invest in these opportunities, to purchase businesses that are going to continue to grow our economy, and what has to happen.
I definitely will do that. I want to pull back for 1 second, and I really appreciate what Miguel was saying in terms of the why. I think in the procurement realm, we still are confusing the opportunity for business and business success with some kind of a social service initiative. And when we think about what the objective is, when we are granting to companies owned by people of color, my question always is, how many of them are actually doubling, tripling, and scaling in size? If we are contracting small components or divisions of work, that lowest best pricing where you have to compete yourself out of business, it is not helpful. And when we think about the opportunities in procurement, if we think that the objective is to grow large, sizable, scaling businesses owned by people of color, the approach would be very different. And that leads to the opportunity. When we know that baby boomers are ready to retire, a lot of people are looking to exit their business. There's estimated, 10,000 or more businesses here in Minnesota getting ready to exit in the next 10 years. 2/3 of them do not have a strategy for succession. Kids don't want it. They don't know how they're going to get out. Even if 2,000 of those are supply chain companies that are providing valuable services to two companies here in two companies in Minnesota, we would be at significant risk if they just went out of business. And that actually is happening every day, where companies are choosing to close their doors. Owners don't really see a way out. They're not certain how to prepare their companies for a purchase. And they haven't really even talked about the customers that they're serving. So to your question, a significant asset here are our Fortune 500 companies and our major buying organizations in this market. We have more Fortune 500 companies per capita than any other metro in the country. And we have a very active privately owned business community that can make a significant difference simply looking at their vendor pool and identifying where they have risk for succession, or seller representatives who are working with privately owned businesses that have the ability to be able to identify a company that might be prepared to be sold, and attracting people of color in both of those situations that are ready. Within all of those corporations is amazing amount of talent. Within organizations represented on this screen, there are people with great talent that, if given the chance, would buy a company. And so the opportunity, secondly, is not only just to identify those companies that might be ready for sale, but to help prepare people for acquisition. And that is looking at the due diligence process, really understanding what it takes to buy a company, preparing for the acquisition in terms of financing. It's like buying a house. Can't go tell a seller, hey, I want to buy your business. I'll be back in 3 months after I figure it out. But preparing a buyer for the acquisition. And thirdly, and very importantly, the financing mechanisms. So if a person of color is buying a company, really should have a target of at least 51% or more majority ownership of that person of color. And the ability for that person to be able to have financing that enables them to buy out their investors if they choose, or to be able to attract additional capital later to continue the innovation and growth. So just thinking about the mechanisms and the process of acquisition, I think would be really important. And I believe that we have everything here in the Twin Cities, state of Minnesota, to do that, and to do it in a way that would have a significant impact for a long period of time.
Absolutely. I want to ask ask each one of you a question, and then I'm going to bring Judith back into the conversation to hit one of the questions that's in the chat. I want to remind all the attendees, there's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. You can begin to load questions. For those of you who've put questions in the chat, we've grabbed those. We're going to begin to ask our panelists those questions as well. I want to start with this one while we bring Judith in to the conversation. What is giving you hope right now as each one of you serve as one of our Project Vanguard advisors on our advisory committee, as you think about our ecosystem right now, our community ecosystem, and our efforts to be able to ensure in particular that Black, Latina, Indigenous women are able to become and grow even more of our business owners who are, to your point, are scaling businesses that are creating jobs and scaling wealth in our community. What's giving you hope?
My favorite line is the fact that different is not deficient. And I really think that we are starting to see that the unique qualities of people of color in leadership are assets to our community.
For me, it's about that we know the past. We know where we are today, here now, talking about how we can be better. And also, I strongly believe that we have a very vibrant, energetic, entrepreneur minority community, that the only they need is the equal opportunity that others have, no more, no less, that to put the dream of their business for the better of everyone in this state and the country.
I agree with both of those. And speaking from sort of the demand side of the equation, I really see a lot of hope in the fact that the supply chain disruption is changing the paradigm. So we've all heard about this massive supply chain disruption in all categories of goods. And that's prompting a fundamental paradigm shift. So procurement objectives have now shifted away from cost containment as the preeminent goal, and away from just-in-time delivery. And now companies are really looking at what their operations risk is for procurement decision-making, and they're seeking to mitigate that risk with redundancy. So we've been extracting any sort of redundancy from our supply chain for decades now, and companies are seeing that there's enormous risk in that and are starting to actively seek to add that back. And that means that there are opportunities right now to establish new B2B vendor relationships. And then you combine that transformative change in procurement that's already underway. It's going to happen. It's happening right now. You combine that with the public pledges to supplier diversity that have been made by companies all across the globe, and particularly in our backyard. We have a moment here to open up all kinds of doors. There's a commitment here and a moment to really make a difference, to get contracts, to help Black and Latino-owned businesses and BIPOC businesses get contracts and grow and thrive. And that gives me a lot of hope.
Absolutely, could not agree more. And so important to be able to get that types of information out, so business owners have that hope and a reason to keep going in a fight that sometimes you just don't even know about as a business owner, because you've got your head down doing the work. So I'm encouraged by the opportunity to get that information out. So I think our team is bringing Judith in. I don't know if she's going to be on camera or on voice, but I want to go to some of the questions that we had. And Judith has been answering some in the chat, but I want to pull those answers forward to some of the questions that have been coming in from you all as questions come forward. So I'll do that. So one of the questions that was raised was in regards to what Judith shared about the public-private sector breaking down larger contracts for smaller businesses or investing differently, just how to go about doing that. And Judith, you shared an answer in the chat, but I'd invite you to share any audible responses. And then colleagues, if you have reflections on that too, please join in.
So that takes intentionality. Most people believe, okay, I'm gonna have a small business set aside and all contracts up to $15,000, I'm gonna give them to small businesses. You put it out there and nobody bids on it. So if you don't really know the capacity of the businesses in your supply chain, that's not gonna be a viable strategy. You have to be intentional. I know I have businesses that can provide this product. So I'm going to be intentional about contracting with them, connecting them to opportunity. And I'm not going to stop there, because that $25,000 contract is awesome. But if I did it for $25,000, then how do you make my next contract $50,000 and $150,000 and use this opportunity to grow my business? And also understanding that small businesses, all small businesses, unless you have a line of credit, you're operating on your receivables. So can you change your payment terms so that I can get paid fast enough to make my payroll and then be prepared to access the next opportunity? And then when you start looking at how you're investing in businesses in this space, being able to invest in a business that they have a growth plan, and they don't have to pay you back until they hit the growth plan. Otherwise, I'm paying and I don't have the revenue to be able to support that debt. So from a procurement side, match your opportunity with what's in the supply chain, and then continue to grow those opportunities and make it bigger. And when you're investing in these businesses, They're not going to be able to pay you back every month. How do you adjust patient capital to be really patient so that business has some room to grow before they start dealing with the debt?
I listened to Judith, I kind of think that maybe inside our procurement operations, we're trying to solve the wrong problem. And the question really should be, again, back to what is the objective? And all of those parts are disparate decisions made in different departments because of different rules that have existed over time. The opportunity is obviously systems change on a large scale and really answering the question, how can we grow these valuable partners in our business, and then structuring everything around them. And until our procurement teams do that from, the very corporate rules, there are going to be roadblocks or hindrances to be able to excel. The other thing that I was thinking of is that, we have to think big. When A.G. Lafley was the CEO of P&G, they created businesses. If, for instance, their diaper gel operations were at full capacity, A.G. Lafley would intentionally say, let's put a business in Cincinnati and find people of color to own and operate this business. They might have never been in manufacturing or diaper gel production, but they found talent and set up an opportunity for them to succeed. Our corporations could do that. And the third area is joint venturing. And I think that has been mentioned, but there is a lot of capacity out there, a lot of knowledge, and the ability to be able to come alongside a person of color and build capacity and introduce them to a new marketplace through a joint venture is huge and done frequently as well. But until we really start thinking differently and we're expecting small moves to solve a big problem, it's going to be difficult to see the kind of results that we know could be possible.
I absolutely love that notion, Shannon, of sometimes problems get solved out of problems, and sometimes they get solved, though, out of opportunities. So that notion of every year there's a list published of the top 100 of this and 100 of that. And I'm struck by the fact that in the Twin Cities, that list is a 25 list of the top businesses owned by people of color. And it's a relatively small list, having gone through that with a really fine tooth comb. And I'm struck that we've never set the list to say, how many do we want to have that have revenues over 10 million? How many do we want to have that have revenues over 100 million? And now let's just go create that, as opposed to, well, how much can we spend as a corporate community or as a table? Just like, well, what do we want to have? What should MSP have? Now, what does it take from all of us to go do that? It's a different way of approaching goals that I think as a corporate and government community, our economy could create, and then think about what is the ripple effect back into the economy. And to your point earlier, Judith, then how does the community then rally to shift our thinking as a collective about how we set those goals and aspire to change things? And I think that's the work that's why we're in this, is to just shift that way of thinking about how we go about setting those visions.
And Tuan, I just want to jump in and challenge us all. Why can't we set a goal for 100 companies?
Yeah.
10 million or more, or 100 million or more by a certain date, and see what happens.
So the work that's been done in the region around the local supply chain is incredible. That took a lot of intentional action. The same kind of intentionality that was applied to get the local supply chain, that is the kind of intentionality it's going to take to move the needle for businesses of color. But the fact that it was done, that's tremendous work. That means we know you can do it. You already have.
Absolutely.
One of the things that is important is it's not necessarily about what we believe. It's about ask them, do you believe that? To our business people, our minority, do you believe that you really can be there? And if they have a doubt, so we can explain then why we believe in them. But it's important that not necessarily it's okay that we believe if they don't feel the possibility. And sometimes they know they can, but they're afraid, or maybe they don't know how. And what happened is this happened. What happened is this other happened. So I think that we as a community, we have the role to play too, to put that self-esteem and that intention of moving to the next level to our small business and community, understanding that they are going to have challenge, that we all have challenge until the day we die. There's always going to be there, but they are not alone in the process, and we can be there. And the other thing is about how we can go together, united, from business, for corporations, for nonprofit, economic development, and others together to put that plan. Yes, I strongly agree. If we don't have a target, we are going to continue talking about some issues, and we are going to keep talking. If we say that, and let's talk crazy, that we say that we want to have $20 million to do A, B, or C. So when we are clear of the why, and we are clear about the purpose and the opportunities, I strongly believe that if we go to everywhere with a strong plan, you know, they would do it because they're business people. And this is not necessarily about charity. I like charity. I like help people in need, but this is not. This is about us telling them that we can, as a minority business, that we can help your business grow. Because if you grow, we are going to grow, you know, and this is a win-win relation to everyone. But this needs to be together, and with we have so many good talents in our communities and powerful examples that we can share and make the case.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Completely appreciate that. I want to go back. Judith, one of the questions that we had, and the panel may have examples of this, particularly those of you who've worked in city government. One of the questions that we had was in relation to the disparity study that was done in our marketplace just a few years ago that noted extremely low spend coming out of both our state and local governmental entities, and wanting to think about from the research report that you've done for us here, did you see opportunities and must-do actions that we must take now, and where the greatest opportunities are for us, and even how government and corporations might be working together to see a shift in those arenas?
Yeah, that's a big one. A tremendous disparity study that had some incredible recommendations that no one has implemented. Part of that is folk don't really know how. When you look at the guidance the government gives you on how to advance equity, they generally give you a list of things you can't do. So we have government agencies with a list of things they can't do, just trying to make sure they don't cross the line, so they don't get in trouble, number one, and so they don't get they don't get sued. And in this judicial environment, you make one misstep around the issue of racial equity and you go in the court. So to avoid that, everybody's operating in a little narrow framework. So building the capacity on our public agencies, this is everything you can do. Everything you can do within the legal framework, expanding every opportunity you have, going all the way to the line, but not crossing it. So building that capacity on government, particularly those decision makers, that's really important. And then the other part of that is getting the government to build better guidance. So if you're spending the state's money, the state has given you a list of things.
Bandwidth in Louisiana is challenging us at the worst possible times. Oh, she's right back.
Oh,
got you back.
Did I leave again?
Yep, but you're back.
I'm going to stay off camera and try to finish the answer to the question.
Perfect.
So number one, teach people everything that they can do legally and expand every opportunity as far as you can go without crossing the line. The other part is being able to tell government, can you build some guidance for folk that allows them, that tells them what they can't do, what they can do. Stop telling them the things they can't do. Let's tell people everything they can do to advance equity in a way that's not going to end them up in court. I think there are two ways to get to it. Let's build capacity on the ground. Let's build capacity in government. Make sure everybody has every tool and every strategy they need.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that, Judith. That is a perfect point for us to conclude on that notion of doing everything that we possibly can do. One of the themes that I had before was that we had a notion of getting to yes, that we have sometimes the answers around what we can't do can hold us back from all of the things that we can be doing. To that point that Shannon made earlier is what's stopping us from setting a big, bold, audacious goal that might seem scary, that might not be something that we've ever done before, but it's absolutely possible when we're operating in that spirit of one community, of one ecosystem, where we know that these goals are what's in the best interest of our entire economy, but is going to require laser-like precision and attention on those communities who have been left out of our region and our state's economic prosperity. That requires intentional data-informed goals, just like what you can find inside the report that you have here from the Center for Economic Inclusion and Project Vanguard. I want to say a big thank you to Judith, a big thank you to Shannon, a big thank you to you, Kristen, and to you, Miguel, not only for joining us here today for Powering Inclusion, but also for all the work that you're doing inside each one of your organizations and across our entire state every day to be able to drive inclusive and equitable supply chains and procurement and help us build regional economies that work for everyone. I want to say a big thank you to each one of you for joining us for this conversation on today and for the work that you're doing inside your organizations as well. And want to give you a little bit more information about where we're headed next with Project Vanguard and how you can take advantage not only of this report, but how you can take advantage of this information in moving your own organizations forward. We have quite a bit of things coming up next as it relates to Project Vanguard that you'll have an opportunity to take advantage of. You've already seen the report link provided to you in the chat. We'll have the full report releasing to you on October 1st that you can find on our website, and we'll also share that out to you. You'll have a couple of tools that will come out as a part of that, including a database of small businesses that give you an opportunity to learn more about the ecosystem in our marketplace, and a tool that allows you to learn more about how to analyze the supply chain in our marketplace, what businesses are doing, as Judith spoke about before, and how to do some modeling about our marketplace that helps us take advantage of how the market is trending and helps both vendors and those purchasing companies and governmental entities really make the smartest decisions about our policies and investments that we can. On October 18th, we'll open up a peer action and learning lab for those of you who are in corporations or in government and want to be taking actions to change your policies and approaches to your work in ways that can help you ensure that it's as equitable and inclusive as possible. We've got a team of consultants and strategists who will facilitate a peer action and learning lab just for you, and that will open up on October 18th. On November 1st, Sarun will move fully into her role as our Project Vanguard director, and we're thrilled for that, for her to be able to partner deeply with our accelerator and with each one of you in moving this program forward. On November 21st, we'll announce our first investments from the Vanguard Fund into business owners in our community. And on January 25th, we'll open up for our second round of Project Vanguard and Vanguard Fund investments. In 2023, we're coming to you with some great announcements and a lot more impact from the Vanguard Fund and Project Vanguard. So look forward to those opportunities and announcements, and we'll have more on our website in the coming weeks and days for you to take advantage of. Again, we're really grateful to you for joining us on today for this opportunity. We're grateful to each one of our panelists. We hope that you'll register for our fall series coming up next month. We'll have an opportunity for you to learn more about our work in public policy to drive racial equity impact notes alongside our partners on our policy committee, and our opportunities for ensuring that policymakers have all the tools they need to drive racially equitable public policy. And join us again in December for more empowering inclusion as well. And we hope that you'll take our survey to give us feedback about what you need to continue driving equity and inclusion inside your community, your organization, and our economy. Thank you for joining us, and thanks for all you're doing in partnership and in solidarity.